It's 6:30 and we like to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. So we're going to begin. Good
Great.
evening. I'm Gail Barron and I co-chair Community Board 8's Women and Families Committee with Peggy Price. Welcome to tonight's forum, which aims to educate our community about the New York State ERA initiative, which will be on the ballot this November. We're fortunate to have three outstanding speakers who are experts regarding the provisions in the amendment. Congresswoman Maloney had hoped to join us, but she sends her regrets. An urgent matter prevents her from participating this evening. I'm now going to turn the program over to Peggy.
Thank you very much, and welcome to tonight's program. This November, New Yorkers will be voting on a proposed equal rights amendment to the state's constitution. On the ballot, it will be labeled Proposition 1. If passed, it would significantly expand New York State's protections against discrimination. But what exactly is in this ERA proposal, and how would it tie into the pending ERA to the U.S. Constitution? Tonight, our expert speakers will provide answers, enabling New Yorkers to make informed choices in November. We'll also get an update on the pending Equal Rights Amendment to the United States Constitution. Our distinguished speakers addressing these issues include Rebecca Seawright, a New York State Assembly member and the Assembly's lead sponsor of the proposed ERA to the New York State Constitution. Speaker Kimberly Wolfe Price is an attorney and immediate past chair of the Women in Law section of the New York State Bar Association. And Catherine Franke is a professor at Columbia University Law School and director of Columbia Law's Center for Gender and Sexuality Law. Speakers Seawright and Wolfe Price will focus on New York's ERA, while Professor Franke will explain how New York's ERA aligns, if it does, with the pending national ERA. After all these presentations, speakers will take your questions. We have a lot to cover, so let's get right to it, starting with Assembly Member Rebecca Seawright. Rebecca?
Well, thank you for having me this evening. It's great to see all of you, and thank you to Gail and Peggy, the co-chairs of the CB8 committee, as well as Rita and Michelle and Laurie and other Community Board 8 members that I see, Susan and others on tonight. You have a distinguished panel and the two lawyers and legal scholars, Professor Catherine Franke and the New York Law Bar Association section speaker. And so when we debated the Equal Rights Amendment in New York, all along the way, it was a team effort, and we were consulting the professor, it's good to see you this evening, and other legal scholars. And we were also anticipating what the opposition was going to do. So we're going to lead off tonight with a little video clip from the Assembly and what some of the people that opposed the amendment brought up during the debate. So I thank my staff member Harley Nidus for being on, and I'll ask Harley now to start the video, and then I'll come back on for concluding remarks.
Demonstrators held signs that said, "Someone you love has had an abortion and keep your laws off my body." A gathering in Carl Schurz Park organized by Assemblywoman Rebecca Seawright, a co-sponsor of bills that protect the rights of women in New York State. But people who gathered here say that is not enough, that women across the nation should have access to safe and legal abortion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New Yorkers deserve a constitution that recognizes that every person is entitled to equal rights and justice under the law, regardless of who they are, whom they love, or what their families look like. Because the Bill of Rights of the New York State Constitution does not currently contain a comprehensive equal rights provision, Section 1 of the resolution would expand the Civil Rights Clause of Section 11 of Article 1 of the New York State Constitution to add ethnicity, national origin, disability, age, and sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy to the existing list of protected classes for which discrimination in civil rights is prohibited. This amendment inherently prohibits discrimination on the basis of pregnancy outcome, reproductive health care, and reproductive autonomy.
This bill is an attack on your religion. This bill is an attack on God. This bill is an attack on abortion, on the ability of the baby. That's right, it's not a living cell, it's not an amoeba, it's a baby from conception. And this is an attack on that. This is going to be murder. This is going to be legal lawsuits all over this state against entities that are trying to help most of us and your kids and your relatives and your neighbors. Taking away religious exemption is one of the most heinous things.
I rise today in this chamber on the shoulders of all those in history who have fought for a New York State Equal Rights Amendment to ensure comprehensive protection for equal rights in our state. We have witnessed the obliteration by our nation's highest judicial tribunal of 50 years of federal protection of the rights of women to determine the future of their bodies. We have seen the federal courts turn the clock back on civil, human, and voting rights. We cannot and must not stand by while freedom of choice and freedom from discrimination are so outrageously denied. Why is now the time to update, to amend, to modernize the New York State Constitution? It is not only because we need broader safeguards against discrimination on account of a person's ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, or sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy. It is not only because state statutes in place today that matter so immensely can be superseded significantly more easily than overturning the enshrining of equal rights in our state constitution. And no one should live in fear of discrimination because of who they love or because of how they express their identity or because of who they are. The Equality Amendment is necessary because we have been waiting since the Fourth State Constitutional Convention in 1867, right here in Albany, when Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton tried to amend the Constitution to make men and women equal, from voter rights to gender neutrality to basic citizenship rights. Frederick Douglass was there, but those in power controlled the day, and the resistant forces of change won the day. No changes were made. Now, we are 156 years later. That's right, we sit here 156 years later from the time when suffragettes devoted their efforts in this state capitol to the pursuit of equality for all. The time for a constitutional change is long overdue. It has arrived, and it is now. The state constitution was last amended to address the topic of equality under law in 1938, when Section 11 was first adopted. This was prior to the civil rights movement, the movement for gender justice, the LGBTQ movement, the disability rights movement, and developments in anti-discrimination laws. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to dedicate my vote on the New York State Equality Amendment to all of the suffragettes who came together in Albany 156 years ago to advocate that equality be included in our state constitution. We honor their legacy by our actions today. New Yorkers deserve a constitution that recognizes that every person is entitled to equal rights and justice under the law. The concept of equality under the law is a foundational principle of our democracy. I rise to dedicate my vote today to my dear friend, the late Roe v. Wade attorney, who was here in the chamber with us in 2019, It was 50 years ago that she argued and won Roe versus Wade. The only way to avoid the horrors of illegal abortion is to keep it legal, and state constitutions are the vehicle for that purpose. I rise to dedicate my vote to my dear friend, the late Edie Windsor. Together with her wife, they paved the road for marriage equality on a federal level. In the wake of a terribly regressive United States Supreme Court, we are protecting their legacy and the rights of the LGBTQ+ community. Most importantly, the voters of our great state will have the opportunity to assure themselves and future generations of New Yorkers that equality belongs in their Constitution. I proudly cast my vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Ms. Seawright in the affirmative.
So thank you for watching that clip in Albany. I think it shows a little bit of what the minority party objected to. They attacked it on a religious exemption, which the constitutional amendment doesn't touch at all. My dear friend Sarah Weddington, who argued and won Roe versus Wade, passed away, and I had the opportunity to speak at her funeral at the state cemetery in Texas. And she predicted that Roe versus Wade would be overturned. And so I think once the Dobbs decision came out, the motivation to finally get the state constitution updated and enshrine reproductive rights and reproductive autonomy into our state constitution, the momentum was there to get it done. And I see Laurie Boris, I thank your son, Assemblyman Alex Boris, for being a co-sponsor and so strongly supporting the amendment. I think as we move forward toward November, we have to educate people, which is what you're doing tonight, to turn over the ballot. They will find this. It's the only state amendment. There are 5 other amendments that refer to New York City. And there is a campaign going on upstate against the amendment. There's several candidates that are running, and this is specifically their platform. A woman's running for state senate, and her platform is strictly to vote against this expanded equality amendment. So I'm more optimistic than ever about our will and our ability to get this passed in November. And I just want to encourage people to tell everyone they see and know, their neighbors, community activists and leaders, to be sure and flip the ballot over. And if they don't understand the amendment, to reach out to Community Board 8 or to my office at 212-288-4607, the League of Women Voters. Of course, being a government office, we keep the politics out of it, but I think it's important to hear what the opposition is saying if you get questioned. And so that's why I wanted to show you a little bit from a soundbite from one of my colleagues that was strongly opposed to it. I look forward to November coming, and I'm confident that we're going to get this amendment passed. As you know, it's gone through some legal hurdles this summer in court, and we've won those battles. One of my outgoing colleagues from the minority side, who's retiring, Marjorie Burns, went into court and filed a lawsuit saying that the Attorney General didn't issue a decision that it was constitutional within a certain time frame, which the law clearly says that it was within the parameters and that it wouldn't prevent something from being constitutional. So it's been an interesting road to get to this point. Again, I want to thank the 2 legal scholars that you're going to hear from later tonight on this panel. And thank you again for having me this evening. On to victory.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, for your remarks, and also for all the hard work that you do for our community. Our next speaker is Kimberly Wolf-Price, who, as Peggy noted, is the immediate past chair of the Women in Law section of the New York State Bar Association. Kimberly?
so much, Gail, and thanks to you and to Peggy for inviting us here this evening. Thanks everyone in attendance who's joining to hear about this important issue. The Assembly member spoke for us at the Women in Law section at our annual meeting in Midtown this January. We devoted an entire day from the Women in Law section on New York's ERA and this topic, and it has been the focus for the entire year. We have a special edition of our magazine that's focused on this issue. We're dedicated to making sure that we're educating individuals about the importance of the New York ERA, or as we're now calling it, Prop 1, when you flip your ballot. So as Assemblymember Seawright, as the sponsor, can speak certainly firsthand to how we got here and how Prop 1 got to the ballot. I can talk a little bit about some of the concerns that we have heard as well, give you a little bit of an overview of that legal challenge that didn't work. And then, of course, talk about what motivated the Women in Law section to focus so deeply on the education efforts related to the New York ERA. As you may or may not know, New York's Constitution right now under Section 11, Article 1, the human rights protected are race, color, creed, and religion. Prop 1, and as you heard a little bit there, but I'd like to just read it for you, would amend the New York State Constitution in this way: no person shall, because of race, color, ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, creed, religion, or sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy, be subjected to any discrimination in their civil rights by any other person or by any firm, corporation, or institution, or by the state or any agency or subdivision of the state pursuant to law. There's a significantly broader set of human rights protections and civil rights protection that would be part of our state constitution when Prop 1 passes. It's important because, as you saw from the clip, there were concerns raised about free expression of religious beliefs, and the bill's sponsors did an excellent job of listening to those concerns and making clear that religious freedoms can live in conjunction with the civil rights outlined in Proposition 1. Nothing has changed. I will admit there remained that group of opponents, which I call the bathroom and locker room line of reasoning. They always bring up the what will happen if these rights are changed. It often comes up when changes are made to secure rights based on gender identity or gender expression. And those in opposition turn to what feels like scare tactics, discuss issues and say that this means that young children will share locker rooms with each other at school. There will be no ability to separate by gender, and that things will be unsafe in bathrooms and locker rooms. These are baseless. Prop 1 changes the standard under which any government laws or ordinances or mandates can be made and allows for basic civil rights protections. It does not change how bathrooms are designated. So if you've heard any of those scare tactics, it's sort of a very common theme, and that they're simply baseless. That's not going to be an issue or problem. The Prop 1 really is there to ensure human rights and civil rights for a much broader group of New Yorkers. So basically, if someone did try to pass, if some municipality in New York tried to pass a law that is based on gender, that municipality would have to prove that the law is narrowly tailored as possible, and is being put in place to achieve a compelling government interest. So these bathroom lines, if you hear them, obviously that's not the case. There would be no compelling government interest to make all children use the same bathroom. I say that because the case that was brought to challenge or to remove the ERA from the ballot was in many ways brought based on a procedural course, right? Saying that the correct rules weren't followed to get Prop 1 to the ballot. There was a lot motivated by this type of scare tactic. So the ERA passed in the 2 consecutive sessions of the New York State legislature and passed both houses by strong majorities each time. It was this summer that the challenge to the ERA being on the ballot was brought. What's important to note there is that the second passage in the state legislature was January 23rd of 2023, but the challenge was brought in 2024, more than a year later. So there's some thought that it was, of course, the timing was intentional to get the ERA knocked off the ballot. And the reason for that is that it is no easy feat, and kudos to Assemblymember Seabright and her team. It is no easy feat to in any way amend the New York State Constitution. There's it's very structured and set out. Legislatures are 2-year cycles, so it has to pass 1 2-year sitting of the New York State Legislature and both houses, and then a second sitting of the New York State Legislature in 2 houses. Then after that, it is available for the ballot. This is a long process. This is not done on a whim, and it takes a great deal of effort for this passage. I see a hand raised. I don't know, Peggy, is it okay if I?
What we
We'll
do
take
is have
questions
Q&A at the end.
Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, thanks so much. So the challenge was brought, for those of you, I'm sure all of you know, but in New York State, the Supreme Court is actually our trial level court, and the Court of Appeals is our highest court. It was brought by the outgoing assembly member that Ms. Seawright mentioned, and it was brought in a Supreme Court in Wyoming County, I believe, or Livingston County, somewhere in sort of Midwestern New York. The trial court judge did agree with the plaintiff and asked that the ERA be removed from the ballot. The New York Attorney General almost immediately said that they would be appealing, and that was to the 4th Department in Rochester, which is our intermediate court level appellate court. And they said, no, we're just going to stay that it remains on the ballot. So for anyone who says otherwise, the ERA has remained on the ballot this entire time. It has never left the ballot. The 4th Department actually agreed with the Attorney General and said, nope, we're going to overturn that trial level court. And then when the original plaintiff attempted to bring this to the New York State Court of Appeals, they refused to hear and said the decision was set. So that's the really short, quick version of what happened. But the ERA, known as Prop 1 now, has remained on the ballot consistently the entire time. And it was never, the challenge saying it was that the rules were not followed was dismissed. So it's been on the ballot and it remains on the ballot. I gave you that date because I thought it was important that from January 2023 as the last passage until now could show that it wasn't really a concern for the procedural context of how the measure got to the ballot, but more of a strategic play to remove it from the ballot. So the impetus for why the New York State Bar Association Women in Law section decided to reinvigorate the efforts to support New York's ERA and the federal ERA, because the section has supported the ERA for a long time. It's no coincidence that it was the Dobbs decision of the Supreme Court that spurred us on to even more action. So it became clearer to us that changing political tides would change the rights that we have in New York State, and those of us in New York State often take for granted. I think as we've spoken to people about New York's ERA and this proposition throughout the course from its first introduction, many people in New York State assume we already have these protections in our Constitution. And I think that is one of the uphill battles that is being faced by the proponents of the measure. Most people assume, well, it's New York. We have it. That already exists. Why do I have to worry about it? But in fact, it is not in New York's Constitution, and it is important that it is. I will say that as a female attorney, someone who took the oath that said that I would uphold the Constitution of the United States and that of the state of New York, it is not lost on me that I am not included in that Constitution in the same way that my husband is when he took that same oath. It may seem small to some people, but it is a very important way to protect against changing political tides. It took so many years, such great effort to get this on the ballot to amend the Constitution. It is a way to ensure that basic civil rights and human rights are protected no matter what. And I think that's the important piece here for all of us. The other critical piece here, I believe, is that it's a bit of a lesson in civics and the power of civics. So in order to pass, it had to go to both houses of the legislature in 2 separate sittings. That means that New York State voters who elected the assembly members and senators that voted in the first session and those that voted in the second session, those were brought there by the voters of the state of New York. And now it is fully in the hands of the voters of the state of New York if Prop 1 is successful. It's a powerful expression of the democracy that I personally am not ready to give up on yet. And it is an important way for all of us to be able to stand up for each other and to make sure that we are focused on fairness and protecting each other in society. So with that, I will say that many of the things that we've talked about with the Women in Law section are about educating, making sure people understand that it is their ability to decide what happens with this proposition. We've done programming throughout the state, including 2 last week for educational purposes, one on a college campus to talk to the students there about the power of their vote and what it means. And we have a lot of resources and other information available, but it's not that we're not campaigning for this. We just want to make sure people are educated as to what it means and what can be achieved by the power of the vote. So thanks so much.
Kimberly, thank you so much for all of your efforts and also reaching out to ensure as best as possible that people are educated. Because we have found in talking to members of the community, they weren't even aware that this happened to be on the ballot. Our final speaker is Professor Franke, who is a professor at the Columbia Law School, and she also serves, as Peggy noted, as director of Columbia Law's Center for Gender and Sexuality Law. Professor.
Thank you, Peggy. And thank you all for inviting me to be part of this discussion tonight on such a critically important piece of, as Kimberly just described, piece of our engagement as democratic citizens. Amending our Constitution is one of the most important things we do. And for that reason, the New York Constitution makes it difficult to do and makes it a hyper-democratic process in the sense as Kimberly described. The legislature has to act twice and then it goes to the people. And so the measure Proposition 1 is coming to us in November. As all of us have mentioned, the campaign is flip the ballot because Proposition 1 will be on the back of the ballot. Of course, there are very important things on the front of the ballot too. So fill out both sides of the ballot. Let me say a little bit more about New York's ERA, Proposition 1, and then I'll just close with a few thoughts about the federal ERA, as you've invited me to do. What we're doing is amending language that was added to the New York Constitution in 1938. Right, so this part of the Constitution is almost 100 years old, and what we're doing is updating the New York State Constitution to make it a 21st century Constitution. And what's important about it is that we're adding all of these categories that we didn't really think critically about in the 1930s, 1920s, let alone 1868, when the Constitution was fully ratified. But we're also adding categories to the Constitution that already receive statutory protection through the New York State human rights law, New York City human rights law, through interpretations of the Equal Protection Clause of the New York State Constitution that the New York Court of Appeals have implemented. So when Assemblywoman Seawright's video at the beginning had this, other member of the New York State Legislature losing his mind because horrible things are going to happen, that's obviously not going to happen. All these categories are all law. They're already protected in many cases by federal law. Many other states protect these categories of identity from discrimination. Civilization as we know it has not come to a halt. So we've tried and experimented in many other contexts, including New York State, to protect these categories of identity. And it's at a minimum the decent thing to do to put it into our Constitution. So when we get these Chicken Little hysterical statements from both elected officials and private parties opposing the ERA because all these terrible things are going to happen, what they're really doing is trying to ring a scary bell because they want to continue forms of discrimination in New York State. That many of us, and hopefully a majority of us who will vote for Proposition 1 oppose. It's just really about equal citizenship in our state. So nothing radical here, nothing scary here. We're just ratifying on a constitutional level what we're already doing on a statutory level in many ways. What is new about the ERA and the kind of approach to discrimination that the ERA is going to bring and that Proposition 1 is going to bring is that it allows for the governmental entities, whether it's a state legislature, city, county, whomever, to implement affirmative measures that are designed to dismantle structural forms of discrimination. Now that can mean affirmative action. But it can also mean a focus on outcomes of how laws impact people's lives and may have the unintended effect of perpetuating or worsening forms of structural inequality for all of the groups that Kimberly and Assemblywoman Seawright enumerated before, and I won't offer that full list. And let me just give you a quick example of what this means. When Congress passed the stimulus package after COVID was decimating the economy and we were still all shut down, they identified that restaurant owners were among the people worst hit by the shutdown related to COVID. Of course, none of us went to restaurants for quite a long time. And the restaurant owners that were most impacted negatively were those that were owned by women and people of color. And so the stimulus law said, we're going to give checks to everybody who owns a restaurant and has lost a lot of money due to the shutdown related to COVID, but we're going to fast track checks to women and people of color owned restaurants for the first 2 weeks, and then everybody else will get their check. And this white guy that owns a pizza restaurant in Tennessee said, whoa, wait a minute, that discriminates against me on the basis of my sex, male, and race, white. And he sued in federal court. And the federal courts found that actually this stimulus measure that was designed to get checks to people who the data showed needed most to get them the checks fastest, but everybody else would get their check too. Yes, that was a form of unconstitutional discrimination. So what we've learned with our federal form of equal protection is that at this point, it's protecting privileged groups more than it's protecting those who have experienced decades, if not centuries, of discrimination in our society. And what's fabulous about the New York ERA, the Proposition 1, is that it will allow the state, counties, cities, all of the governmental entities to implement measures to address what is structural discrimination, like what we did in the stimulus bill, and make it legal to do so in New York State. So that won't count as a form of sex or race discrimination in New York. So that's one thing in addition to the addition of these categories that I think is quite important. We also see, as we did in the short video at the opening, this concern that, oh no, this is going to violate our religion. Well, religious liberty gets ample protection in New York State already. Article 1, Section 3 of the New York State Constitution protects the free exercise of religion, as does the federal Constitution. But our highest court in New York, the Court of Appeals in 2006, ruled that New York State's religious liberty protections are actually even greater than they are on the federal level. So there's nothing in Proposition 1 that will undermine those religious liberty protections. And indeed, Proposition 1 will repeat the discrimination on the basis of religion protections that exist in the New York State Constitution. So religion's protected doubly in the New York State Constitution in a way that's not the case of the federal Constitution. So that guy is lucky to live in New York, that he has so amply has his religious liberty rights protected. So that's just a false flag. That's not a real problem. Thirdly, or fourthly, I'm not sure what number I'm on now, this concern about bathrooms. We've been experimenting with bathrooms in colleges that have had co-ed bathrooms since I was in college, and that was a long time ago. Terrible things have not happened. The U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted sex discrimination protections in the educational context to include protections against discrimination on the basis of gender identity. And it's this conservative Roberts Court that held that, right? So this value that we ought to extend equality rights to people on the basis of their gender identity, including dormitories and bathrooms and that sort of thing, is not a radical idea. And it's one actually that we already have protections for, recognized by the US Supreme Court, this very conservative Supreme Court. Last thing I want to say about the New York State ERA. I just came back from Las Vegas. We were there last week because Nevada is the most recent state to also amend its its constitution to add a whole lot of new categories of protection, to have an ERA. It's a terrific measure, just like the New York measure is in Prop 1. And what we did out in Nevada was meet with elected officials and local activists and presented with them with the model policy agenda that we and my team at Columbia at the law school, we have an ERA specific project there. We've developed a handbook, a how-to guide to implement your ERA. And we gave it to the folks in Nevada because they're ready to put theirs to work. We're going to put it to work in New York. I can share the link for it in a moment through the chat, or however it is that we can do that. We can share with you right now. But I want to say that the most important thing isn't just to have this measure pass in November. It's then to put it to work. And our legislature, our mayors, our city councils, our county executives, we have a roadmap for you to how to put this to work in any state, but most recently we were in Nevada, and as I said, we're now back in New York. Finally, the Federal Equal Rights Amendment, which has been kicking around since the 1970s. I'm sure many of you think, what, isn't that already part of the US Constitution? Or didn't that die in the 1980s? Neither of those things are true. All of the requirements for adding sex-based equality, the federal ERA only deals with sex, not all the other enumerated categories that we thankfully have in Prop 1 in New York. But all of the constitutional requirements for adding that language to the Constitution on the federal level as the 28th Amendment have been met. Right? The Constitution requires that both houses of Congress pass the measure by 2/3 vote, which they've done, which they did a while ago in the 70s, and then that the measure goes out to to the state legislatures, and it has to pass 3/4 of the state legislatures, which is 38. And we reached that point when Virginia ratified the ERA just a couple of years ago. So by all legal means, or by all legal terms, the ERA should be the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. In August, the American Bar Association issued a resolution declaring the ERA actually fully effective and part of the US Constitution. The American Bar Association is not the most radical feminist organization I've ever met. So, and I know a lot of those groups too. So if it's legal and part of the Constitution and the 28th Amendment to the ABA, it should be to everyone else as well. And there are some remaining reservations about the final legality of the ERA that have to do with a deadline that was included in the resolution that Congress passed. I'm not going to go into the weeds on the legality of that unless somebody's dying to hear about it. But what I will say is if you really want to know about it, you can go to our website at the ERA Project at Columbia Law School, and we have explainers on all of these issues, and including the litigation that's gone on in New York State around Prop 1 and the issues with the Attorney General. And part of what we do at the ERA Project is break down complicated legal questions for journalists or regular folks who are not lawyers, but who are interested in these issues. Let me stop there and just say again how grateful I am to be part of this group. And don't forget to vote on the front of the ballot and on the back of the ballot on November 5th.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your remarks. They were quite enlightening. We're now going to open the forum to Q&A, and we'll, if people will just have not been on board with our meetings before, if you go to your reactions button at the bottom of your screen and you push the hand, then you'll be able to be recognized. And we'll go to the public first, and Peggy's going to handle this
I
part of the
just want
meeting.
to, before we proceed, I just want to ask a question of Kim. Kim, can you just specify what the new aspects of the ERA are that are being proposed to being added to the Constitution, and why those particular items?
Sure. So it's currently race, color, creed, and religion in Section 11, Article 1. And what will be added is ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy, pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy. And I think, as the professor just mentioned, that's really just to ensure that it is a full and complete inclusion in the New York State Constitution for equal rights and equal protection for all of us in New York State. So other states have not been as broad, but Nevada and some others recently are close. And the federal isn't quite as broad, but all of those are being added to ensure that the strong laws that we have against discrimination in New York State, have the protection of our Constitution. And Professor Franke, I don't know what you'd want to add to that.
Well, the other piece I would add is this idea that we can implement affirmative measures to dismantle discrimination, and that count as discrimination itself, so that we have a contextualized, sometimes in the law we call it a substantive approach to equality, in the sense that it has to deliver substantive equality, not just be a measure that is formally equal in the sense that it treats two groups equally the same. But if those two groups have historically not been equal, treating them the same perpetuates that historic inequality. And so affirmative action or measures that recognize, like I said, with that stimulus bill is a good example, the ways in which, not intentionally, but structurally, certain groups suffer fewer opportunities. New York State's Proposition 1 will allow for those measures to be implemented.
Thank you.
Peggy, do you want to recognize people for their questions, starting with the public?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's start with Rita Popper. Rita?
Thank you so much for this informative session. All of us who are sitting here have some idea that this is going on. What are we doing? What is being done to inform the voters, all the voters, A, to turn over their ballot to the other side, and B, how important it is to vote on Article 1?
I'll say the League of Women Voters in many parts of the state has been very active with voter education programs and outreach, making sure that there are resources. Certainly, Professor Frankie and the Center at Columbia is another great resource and has done a lot of excellent work. But it is a bit of an uphill battle. I think local elected officials can also serve a very powerful role here in this process. Besides the League of Women Voters, Professor, are there other groups that you're seeing focusing on this?
Yeah, there's actually a dedicated campaign to get Prop 1 across the finish line. It's called New Yorkers for Equal Rights. New Yorkers for Equal Rights. If you just Google that term, you will go to their website. It explains the ERA, and it has a page, and it asks for you for money, of course, but it also has a page that allows you, it tells you what you can do. How you can volunteer, how you can knock on doors, how you can get involved in the campaign here in New York to pass Prop 1. So I would really encourage you. We're part of the coalition that has been working with New Yorkers for Equal Rights, as is the New York Civil Liberties Union and other wonderful organizations, New York Now, to get Proposition 1 out there. People know about it, know to flip their ballot, know to vote for it, what it is. So I would direct folks to New Yorkers for Equal Rights.
Is there a commercial that will come into people's homes and tell them what to do? People are lazy. They will not go here, go there, or whatever. How are the masses being addressed? Because it's the masses who are going to be voting.
Well, they're letter writing campaigns, they're calling, they're doing all the things that the national campaigns and local campaigns are doing as well. I can't speak to whether they're buying television time. I personally don't have a TV anymore. But I know a lot of other people do. But I'm sure that they are doing their best with the funds they have. And all of you can help support the campaign also by making a donation if you want. Excuse me. But I don't know about TV ads.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll hear from Erica Burson, Elaine Walsh, and Michelle Birnbaum. Let's start with Erica Burson.
Thank you for that, Professor Frankie, because we know that there's no more persecuted person on the planet than a white man right now. But also that Ruth Bader Ginsburg won the landmark case based on a man being discriminated against. So it's not without precedence that something like that has happened. So I fully support it. And I don't know what happened to Harley, but what I've read recently is that our Democratic State Party is doing nothing to put money behind this to get it out in front of people, that it's all grassroots, whether it's Kim's organization or other organizations, but the Democratic State Party is not doing anything to get this out to voters to support it. And that's exactly what happened previously with anything else that gets on the ballot, is our Democratic State Party just drops the ball on these things from the top down to get this out. Like, this might be a bipartisan thing for, people who work for nonprofit organizations, but for the Democratic Party, this isn't. And the Democratic Party in our state always drops the ball on this stuff. So is there somebody, I noticed Rebecca left the call, but is there somebody on this call that is part of our elected officials that can address this question? And oh, by the way, Sarah, you're a cat. So I don't know if you have kids, but they turned a filter on. Nobody's told you through the whole call.
Harley is here from Assembly Member C. Wright's office. So if Harley could be unmuted, please.
Thank you, Ms. Person and Ms. Barron. As state employees, as government employees, we're not allowed to engage in electioneering or party politics. So myself and my colleagues, we don't have any official contact with the state party, and we're not involved in how they advertise or promote any measures on the ballot. So that unfortunately, I cannot provide any more information on that.
Yeah, see, this is just ladders up to the lack of Jay Jacobs being a leader for her party. I mean, I'm just dumbfounded by this because the last time we had things on the back of the ballot, they failed, A, for lack of people showing up to vote, whether you're doing it early by mail, early in person, or day of. These things always fail in this state because of that. And a lot of good people have clearly put a lot of good work into this. So I am just confused. I continue to be confused by that in this state and our city.
Well, the one thing I will say is that a number of organizations are planning outreach to the community, educational forums such as ours tonight, to alert the public to this ballot initiative and what it means. So I think you'll see more of these forums between now and Election Day, and hopefully they'll reach more of the public.
Election day is 6 Tuesdays from yesterday, and early voting starts in what, 2 weeks here in New York?
Can I jump in just for a second and respond to your first comment, Erica, which is about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her litigation strategy, that where she brilliantly, I think, brought a number of cases when she was at the ACLU leading the Women's Rights Project there on behalf of men. And those cases weren't just cases where it was men who happened to be treated differently in the workplace. The cases were ones that raised the specter of sex stereotypes, that men are always the breadwinner, that men are never doing dependency work, caring for an elderly or disabled family member, and are punished for that reason. And so the underlying value of the strategy she used was to point out that sex equality laws should get at what are considered to be old and outdated stereotypes about who women are and who men are. So it was a richer way to think about sex discrimination than merely men are being treated differently than women.
No, I totally understand that, but precedents come from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But I do want to learn more about, because to your point, it's one thing to implement policies, it's another thing to carry them out. And I fully expect that the minute we hopefully get this passed, there are going to be lawsuits against them. So how do we access, is it, you said it's New Yorker?
New Yorkers for Equal Rights. You can just
Okay.
Google that and it will come right up. And get involved. I mean, it's disappointing, as you say, that some of our elected officials are not more engaged, or maybe they can't be. But it's on us. And if the party is letting us down, we have to step up. So I would encourage you to reference New Yorkers for Equal Rights.
Thank you.
Harley, did you want to say something else before we go on to Elaine Walsh?
Yes, I just have one more point. We do have a literature on the Equal Rights Amendment at our office that we produced, inform people on what the measure is, what it'll say on the ballot, and so forth, the history of it. We bring those to various community events throughout the district, and we encourage people to read them. Of course, there's a difference between that and advocating for people to vote for the amendment, which we, of course, cannot do. But this is something that we are letting people know about, and we're trying to share information about the ERA whenever possible.
Thank you. Elaine?
Thank you. I thought the presentation by Rebecca and two attorneys was excellent. It's also an embarrassment that our state is so far behind, and that we do now finally understand that to protect our rights, we must change the Constitution. My concern, and I agree with the previous speaker, there's been no publicity from whether it's the Democratic Committee or anyone talking about Proposition 1. And there's been lots of conversation I've seen that, well, it's has too many things in it. It should have only stayed with protection for women. That is past the bullet. But my concern is, and it was raised by the previous speaker, how do we educate people to flip the ballot? I have to tell you, people just think they just go down. I mean, I'm doing absentee and I know what to do. But how many people look at the ballot, look at who's running, and there's nothing like, hey, turn over. So what kind of direction can we have to make sure? Because I'm going to tell you, in New York City, some things have gotten passed that should never have been passed. Some things got passed that maybe shouldn't have got passed because people did not turn the ballot over. So how do we do this to educate them? And the other thing I'm upset about is that we still don't have a national ERA. I mean, God knows in my generation, and I'm over 80, what can I tell you? When are we going to get it done? I'm leaving it to you all, not me, but give us some guidance how to flip without being political. Of course, it's garbage. It's not political. But how do we influence and get the ads out there to do it? I love what's happened with the Columbia. I'm very pleased with the law center there and with Kimberly. But what do we do? Give us some guidance. How do we get the message out? Thank you. And I'm a long-term advocate, by the way, so I'm dumbfounded by this. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think that Professor Frankie, the New Yorkers for Equal Rights, finding ways to help fund them, whether it's friends or otherwise, a few dollars from all of us or anyone, that's going to be a huge part of this. And I know it seems futile sometimes, or it seems not enough, but everyone telling everyone they know is a hugely important piece of this process. Everyone sharing, flip the ballot, and when you're in line until you're at a certain point, when in line to vote, where we get close enough, is it 35 feet? I can't remember right now. It's okay to say, well, don't forget to flip that ballot. And on your way in, it really does sometimes come down to just telling our neighbors and our friends, we think that's not enough. We feel like we don't have a voice, and I truly understand why. But that is equally as important in this process as donating money and getting those commercials on. I don't know if you want to add anything, Professor.
I entirely agree with all of that, and I'll note that my my colleague Naomi Young, who is with the ERA project at Columbia, has put some resources in the chat if folks can see them about the model policy agenda, their explainer on the New York ERA. And there's a social media blast for the New York ERA tomorrow. There's a link for that as well that New Yorkers for Equal Rights are doing. And thanks, Naomi, for giving us those links. In terms of the federal constitution or the ERA, call Senator Schumer, call Senator Gillibrand, call their office and say, look, I think this is critically important. Senator Schumer has an awful lot of power in Congress. And when we're at this point in the amending process for the Constitution, the question is rarely one of whether there are legal hurdles to getting it finished. It's more about a political will. And having the President of the United States, whoever that may be, say that she considers the ERA, the 28th Amendment, having Senator Schumer say that, Senator Gillibrand say that. These are important ways of building a kind of political consensus that ratifies what the American Bar Association has concluded. Again, not the most radical feminist organization, is that the 28th Amendment should be recognized as the ERA to the Constitution. So you all have a lot of power in your own lives to call your elected officials, to use social media, tell your friends. If you're part of any other communities, and I'm sure you are, talk it up. These kinds of grassroots movements can be very effective.
Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Raditsky, and then we'd like to hear from Michelle Birnbaum and Alita Camp.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. So just as we were talking here, I realized, let me take a look. I live in Westchester County. I said, let me take a look and see what the Westchester County Democratic, Party has on its website. And I specifically live in the city of New Rochelle, and I looked on their website. There is nothing. There is absolutely nothing that indicates flip the ballot, that has a whisper or a hint of this being on the ballot. And you know what? It never occurred to me to even look until we are having this conversation today. So as an outreach suggestion, since we're all looking for some practical ways to move this forward, or to get this idea of flipping the ballot out, I just emailed both of those organizations and said, hey, what are we doing to flip the ballot, to get that initiative out and known to the public? I don't see signs. I don't see, anything on the website. How can I help here? Of course, it always has to be, how can I help here? Because I'm sure they don't want to just hear, here's the problem, here's the problem, here's the problem. We want to be part of the solution. So I would suggest to all of us, in pointing out the lack of information that is out there, that we would serve as a resource. And maybe that's what the impetus will be to help move this forward in these critical few weeks leading up to the election. And thank you for everyone's time, truly.
Thank you very much. Michelle Birnbaum?
Yes, thank you very much, Peggy, and thank you to the speakers. Very informative. Very pleased that you're here. Everybody's ideas for how to get the word out about what's on the ballot all make sense. The other thing is the election workers on the day of voting, early voting, whatever, can instruct people to turn the ballot over as they hand them a ballot to vote. Also, the ballots have not gone to print yet, and so a simple turnover on the bottom on both sides could be very helpful, because you don't know which side a person looked at, how the ballot was handed to them, with the election side up or the props side up. Just say turnover. So I think those can be very helpful. I have a couple of questions. I like to also, and this is my issue, I haven't had time, I like to see the actual wording of the bill, actually what it says, not an interpretation by anybody. So if the link to that actual bill can be made available to us. I know we can find it online, but it would make it much easier if we just had a link. Because I haven't read it in full, I have a question. And the word that caught my attention in this was age. And I don't know whether or not this is addressed or dealt with at all in this bill. And that's why I'm asking the question. Does it include gender affirming care for minors? And if so, how does it deal with parental involvement?
Well, it doesn't specifically mention that. It talks about gender identity and gender expression. But the ERA, or excuse me, the Prop 1, does not undermine parental authority or power with their children in any way. So whatever the existing state law is that deals with medical procedures for a child or for a minor, and the requirement of parental consent would remain in place. This doesn't obviate that in any way. Now, in the abortion context, you may know that there are judicial bypass procedures for say that there's a child, a minor who is pregnant and wants an abortion, and for whatever reason, they may not want to tell their parents. It could be one of their parents that caused the pregnancy in the first place, or they're not in a supportive environment otherwise. So there are procedures for going around or bypassing the parents and having judicial overview substitute for parental consent. And that would be, I would think that would apply in equal measure with other types of medical procedures for children where there may be a conflict between the child and the parents. But that's not something that that Prop 1 changes in any way. Those are the background rules that would apply to any medical procedure. Whether the parents, let's say, are Christian Scientists, and they may have reasons why they don't want to have their child have a medical procedure for religious reasons. We have ways of dealing with that already. So Prop 1 doesn't change any of those parental rights or responsibilities in any way.
Does it, while not specifically clarifying or defining process, does it say what you just said, that the existing laws that exist elsewhere, blah, 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 apply here? Does it say that at all, or does it not say anything?
It does. It's silent on that question, but which means that those existing laws
automatically apply?
It will come up if there's litigation. That will be clarified through litigation, but there's no reason to believe that Prop 1 in any way would override what are existing and well, tried and true processes for dealing with minor health care. And I think the fact that there are people who oppose Proposition 1 who are raising this issue, that this will somehow undermine parental authority or power with their children, simply haven't read Proposition 1. It isn't going to do that in any way.
Great. Good to hear. And I look forward. Do you have a link so we can actually read Proposition 1?
If you look in the chat, can people see the chat? I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
ERA Projects Explainer that Naomi Young has posted, and you can get the language there. New Yorkers for Equal Rights will have it on their site as well.
And the New York Civil Liberties Union.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Alita Camp.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you, everyone, for such an excellent and informative program. The comments were very thorough and very easy to understand as well. If I miss this, I apologize, and you don't need to answer it again. But what happens if it doesn't pass? And is there a difference between not passing because people don't vote, because they don't flip the ballot, or because people are actually voting no?
So if it doesn't pass, then it's completely scrapped. It would be start all over again. And it's a majority. It's the majority, so it has to be the majority of those who vote on that proposition vote yes.
So it would have to go back to the legislature all over again.
It would start all over from scratch.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have more questions? Any other questions?
I think Rita has another question.
Oh, terrific.
I can't help myself. It's the advertising part of me. It is, don't skip it, flip it for the ballot. But it should be, make your vote count. Don't skip it, flip it, and vote the whole ballot.
I love it.
Rita, we need you to sign up with the campaign.
I know. We're going to have to connect you.
I used to.
Alita, do you have another question? Does anyone else have any questions for our outstanding speakers?
Do we want to say anything further or do anything further about this issue of getting the word out about flipping the ballot or suggesting ways that the state ensure their poll workers inform the poll workers to tell the voters to flip the ballot, or do we want to say anything about that, or just not? We don't have to.
Yeah.
I just raise that. Okay.
Rita, and then Elaine.
I am a poll worker. I have been doing that for about 10 years. And I have worked the presidential election. And I cannot begin to tell you how there is no time to talk to the people, especially when the line has 50 people waiting to vote. And what's more important, to tell them how to use their ballot or to get them so that they don't walk out and not vote. It's easier said than done. This is not a tea time. This is thousands of people voting. I know early voting has helped, but I want you to know it is not, some of the poll workers don't talk to anybody. So I just want you to know that is not, it's a last resort. It should be talked to, but there has to be a broader picture that gets to everyone before they get to the poll.
Rita, since you're familiar with the polling places and the operation, what if there were just signs that remind people as they walk in? Is there a space for that? Would that work? Is that appropriate? Is it allowed?
That has to be approved by the Board of Elections. No signs go up unless it is approved. So if you want to get a sign approved, now's the time to see if it can be done.
So if we did something
Ryan,
like a resolution with ideas as to how to get the word out and how to make sure that when people are getting ready to vote, that they know to flip the ballot and vote on both sides.
Excellent idea. Why don't we have a resolution that we can send to our elected officials and to the Board of Elections, I believe it is Mr. Ryan, and suggest this. They certainly have enough time right now to make those posters. So if you'd like, I'd make a record.
Would you? Thank you.
What, right before we go, yeah, we can do that.
else
Before
first.
we go to Elaine, let me just say that I think that the poll worker could just say, as they hand the person the ballot, just say, vote on both sides. That's all they have to do. I mean, I think it should be suggested that they be told by who's ever in charge to just say to people, both vote on both sides.
Yeah, you have to find out if that's legal for the poll worker to say anything, because right now the poll worker can say nothing except to answer a question about getting the ballot. So it is illegal for them to do it. So
Okay, so we can't do that. Okay, it's fine. Let's see, Elaine?
Not depressing. But first of all, I think within the 50 feet or whatever outside, you can say to people, flip the ballot. But I've been in polling places where they say, make sure you turn it over.
Yeah.
That's not illegal to do. I'm sorry, Rita.
okay.
All you say to them is, as you give them the little piece of paper that they have to do whatever, turn it over. It's okay to say that. But what's really mind-boggling is that there's such restrictions and concerns about what's influencing a voter. Turning the ballot over is a straight instruction. If we didn't have computers and all that other stuff, or the kind of ballot we have, look, I've been voting since I'm whatever age it was. I think it was 21 when I was a kid. You flip it. They told you. They're not saying what to do. But if you can't do it now in the polling place, then how do we arrange for people outside the 50 feet or whatever it is to have turn your ballot over? It's not illegal to provide instruction. It's not a political vote. It's an instructional piece. I mean, the ballot, the poll watchers have to tell you, let me tell you the first time, this is how you insert the ballot. It's the same thing. Flip it over and, you know, whatever. So I think we need to take a more active role. But my bigger concern is that there's no advertising, no media telling us about Prop 1. And there was major controversy on should you or shouldn't you, because there were all kinds of language that shouldn't have been in there to begin with. It's in there, it's now. So how do we get the PR out there to say vote? And I think the speaker who lived in the Westchester area, she's right. They're not saying anything about voting. That's the key. The information is the key to us passing. I'm embarrassed that our state still hasn't passed the federal ERA. And God knows I didn't know I had to go through this other stage for New York State. What an insult. I condemn other southern states for their positions, and we can't put ourselves on the page and say, no, it's enough. So how do we figure it out? I leave it to the co-chairs of this committee. Give us some guidance. I mean, I'll work on this. I'll do what I have to do. But damn it, let us pass this and move forward. How my rights are not protected anymore. I don't have children or grandchildren, but boy, anybody, I'm more concerned about everybody else's generations that violations will not be protected. So let's move forward and get it done. Thank you.
Let me just jump in here and say that the campaign, the New Yorkers for Equal Rights, does have a strategy around getting people to flip the ballot.
Okay.
And I would connect with them. And then I might also ask, and this is a suggestion from, again, my colleagues who are from Columbia's ERA project, who are on the Zoom, also the meeting, is that each person on this call commit to talking to 10 people about Proposition 1 and about the backside of the ballot, and ask them to talk to 10 people.
Thank you.
Your Facebook accounts, use your, Instagram, whatever it is you use, but also get your friends at the grocery store and, wherever it is that you go, mention it to people. We can be a powerful force that way.
Thank you. I'm an academic. I've retired, but yes, I did motivate my students to nonpartisan, of course. But thank you for those tips, because I did forget about them. I will do emails now and get them out there. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and support, because I've been very depressed. So this is very helpful for me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We haven't heard yet from Kathy Jolowitz and Judy Snyder. So can we make those the next two people, starting with Kathy Jolowitz?
I don't know if this is the right place to ask this question, but I don't know where else to go or to ask, but something sticks in my mind. We talk about the rights for women and the right to choose and the woman's body, et cetera, but does anybody think about the right of the child, the unwanted child that's forced to be born? And well, I mean, we hear of horror stories, what happens to children. They're put in ovens, they're burned, they're beaten, or they're killed in this all horror stories about these unwanted children. Then there are unwanted children who the parents know and the doctor advises that the child will be maimed for life or some catastrophic life future for a child. Now, suppose hypothetically this child is born, this unwanted child is born and grows up to be an adult, but a crippled adult or a very unhappy adult. Does this adult have the right to choose? Does this adult have the right to sue that they were forced to be born?
Well, I used to teach disability law years ago, and there is something called a wrongful life lawsuit. Could you basically claim that I should not have been born? Most jurisdictions don't take particularly kindly to them because it is such an uncomfortable and some might say ugly message. People in the disability rights community have found, have been very offended by that idea that being born with disabilities is somehow a life not worth living. But it does exist as a thing, and it's an uncomfortable thing to talk about. But you have identified a kind of lawsuit that's been brought a few times, but typically not successfully, just because it seems so morally compromised to say that with the disabilities or the life prospects that I have, I should not have been born. But I will also say I'm going to drop in the chat right now model language for emails that you can send to your friends, to your family, to everybody. You can drop them into social media and share them. And this is language that the campaign has developed. So there we go. Oops, it's too many words. So let me just cut off some of it, but go ahead with the next questions.
Yeah, Judy Snyder, please.
I wanted to second the motion that was made and speak to my second. Whether it's Rita raises, whether it's legal or not legal, I think we should pass the motion and let's send it out to the electeds, and most importantly, let's send it to the election board. And if it's not legal, so they won't pay any attention to it. But at least we've spoken. The community board has made its voice heard. That's all.
Thank you. Lori Boris hasn't spoken.
Good for you. That's perfect, Judy.
Hello, thank you for having this forum, and thank you for Professor Frankie and Kimberly Price for your incredible contributions to this discussion. Assembly Member Seawright likes for me to tell this story, and so I beg your indulgence for those of you who have heard it. My son in the assembly did bring up this issue when faced with the people who make the religious arguments about this. And Ms. Janowitz, you'll also appreciate this, I think. When abortion is illegal, it doesn't change people getting an abortion. It just makes it more dangerous. And most of us in this forum know that. However, sometimes people don't have a choice, as my grandmother did not have a choice in 1943 when she had an abortion because she already had 3 children. And a fourth one would have plunged the family into immeasurable poverty. And so she borrowed $250, which at the time in 1943 was quite a lot of money. And she had an illegal abortion and she died. And, after suffering for, a number of weeks, like she basically bled to death. And my mother, who was 7 years old at the time, has spent her life in trauma about this and is now suffering from dementia. Her brothers, she had an older brother and a younger brother. The older brother and the younger brother were dispersed to various family members at the time, and the younger brother to foster care. So the point that I want to make here is that, first of all, most women who have an abortion are already mothers. And when people say that, oh, this is anti-woman and this is not taking care of the woman, and all those like ridiculous arguments, they are wrong. It's just simply caring for control. They just want control over women's bodies. That's it. End of argument. And I am a practicing Catholic. I teach youngsters about, that God loves them, but I take incredible exception to my church's, unbased argument in my mind about abortion. Abortion, the beginning of life is at first breath. When the child is born, actually born, is when the child has all of the rights that we ascribe to it. Before birth, the mother's life is most important. And I went to Pennsylvania over the weekend to canvass for Kamala Harris and the other local Democrats, and they were focusing almost exclusively on the issue of abortion. So I faced a lot of, a few arguments from people who were like very religious and giving me all this muckety muck about like, their adopted children and all this other kind of, jazz. But the bottom line is that there are, and I agree with you, I think it was Kathy who said this, every child has the right to be wanted. And if I were to sit down with the Pope, I would make this argument. It's like, when abortion is illegal, you are hurting mothers. You are hurting women. It is our choice to do what we want with our bodies, and get the F out of the way. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Lori. Professor Frankie has to leave in 5 minutes. So if anyone has another question for the professor, please raise your hand. Alita? Rose, can you unmute Alita Camp, please?
I thought I did. It's actually a legal question without all of the rightful passion that has surrounded the last few questions, which is a conflict of laws question. If someone in Tennessee is able to sue and prevail because the check that would have gone to him 2 weeks later is going to women and people of color first, how would that impact, if at all, any laws that come up in New York, or any application of the constitutional amendment that this proposition hopefully will lead to?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I guess we'll see. Where New York provides greater protections around discrimination than does the federal Constitution, we may have an uncomfortable conflict between the New York conception of equality and the federal concept of equality. And it's our hope to push the federal conception with the 28th Amendment in the ERA in the direction that New York is going, so that we don't have that conflict anymore. So we're doing as much work on the federal level to implement a 21st century version of equality with the 28th Amendment, one that recognizes the authority of states to dismantle structural inequality, as we are to try to establish that standard in New York. So my goal is not to get that final exam question right, because that is a law school final exam question that you just asked.
So I went to law school.
But instead is to dissolve that conflict by lifting up or leveling up our conception of equality, both in New York State and on the federal level.
And one more quick little thing: what triggers the acceptance of the 28th Amendment as an actual amendment if the Bar Association says, and all of the legal practicalities and requirements have been met? What actually makes it effective?
difficult question. The Archivist of the United States, who is a public official most people have never heard of, has the statutory, the legal responsibility to publish in the National Register all new amendments to the Constitution. In my view, that doesn't make the amendment then effective by publicizing or publishing it. It merely recognizes the fact that it is now an amendment to the Constitution. So it's reflecting a fact that's in existence elsewhere. It doesn't create that fact, if I can say it that way. But there's not a lot of clarity around these legal questions. And I have two colleagues at Columbia Law School who wrote this incredible law review article, for those of you who have the tolerance for reading law review articles, that goes through the history of the amendment process in the United States. Every single one of the amendments that have been proposed or added to the Constitution have had some kind of irregularity in them. And what resolved that irregularity for those that are recognized as part of the Constitution is a political consensus. You know, even around the amendments that we added to the Constitution at the end of the Civil War, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, hugely important amendments. All of them had irregularities associated with them. And it was only when the Secretary of State or the president or some political actor said, hey, let's just call it. Let's just say that this amendment has been added to the Constitution and move on. And that's why I think it would be important for the President of the United States to make that kind of statement, is to say, as a political matter, I regard us as having satisfied all those requirements to add the ERA or to the Constitution of the 28th Amendment. So that's again why you ought to get on the phone to Senator Schumer, to the Harris campaign, to the Biden White House, to Gillibrand, and make that argument.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? If not, the meeting won't be over, but let me just say thank you very much to our superb speakers, Professor Catherine Franke and Kimberly Wolf-Price. You really hit the nail there in providing us with the information we need to proceed to vote. So thank you. And but CB8 members, don't leave just this minute. We have a motion on the floor. So
thank you so much for
thank you.
Thank you so much. Really
We really appreciate
your
it.
incredible insights and information.
Fabulous speakers. Thank you again.
Please go to the ERA Project's website with the link is in the chat. If you want to get more information and get involved in things in the future that are happening. We will be posting all sorts of new stuff, including our most recently released model policy agenda, which I think many of you would find quite interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
again
Thank you,
very
Kimberly.
much.
We really appreciate your presence.
Okay, so there's a resolution on the floor. But before we vote on it, we have to know what it is we're voting on. And Gail chime in, but I don't know, just me, but I don't think we can make a whole slew of demands. The only thing I was thinking was, and let me just finish and then Gail will talk, but I was thinking of passing a resolution that would require poll workers to tell voters as they accept their ballot that they should look on both sides. More than that, I really don't know. You know, I don't think we can do a lot of signage or whatever, but that's just my opinion. But Gail, you talk.
No, I agree with you. And my feeling was, you know, our goal is obviously to educate people, to get them to vote, whatever their choice is, it's their choice. But if anybody has any other recommendations as far as what else we can add beyond the education of the poll workers, to just quickly, when they're handing the ballot to whomever is voting, to tell them to flip the ballot to the other side. Alita?
Thank
And then
you.
Judy and then Rita.
Someone suggested just a sign at the bottom of the ballot, not a sign, but
Right.
language, flip the ballot, which is what I remember seeing in previous elections with the last city charter or other proposals that were on the ballot. It said, flip the ballot or turn it over or had an arrow or did something so that people, when they got to the bottom of the ballot, and it should be under the various columns, not just in the right hand or left hand corner, but large enough to be seen. All it has to do is say, flip the ballot in a different color ink, then it's already there. If there is any kind of discrepancy, I mean, Rita believes one thing, Elaine said something else about the legality of poll workers saying it, and it does sound purely informational, then having it on the ballot eliminates that, and it eliminates a crush on the poll worker, and it eliminates someone who may not hear or may not be focused on what the poll worker is saying. It's actually out in front of people. But I find it appalling that there hasn't been more attention paid, not in a partisan way, but just more attention paid to people having to vote on this question. So so that's just my suggestion, is to put it right there so people can see it, but to highlight it with a different color ink. Thank you.
Thank you. Judy?
Yeah, I think rather than flip the ballot, turn over the ballot. That's my preference in wording.
Okay. Any other ideas? Rita?
And
I'm sorry, Judy.
And
Go ahead.
and maybe, I don't know if it's too late, Rita would know this, if the poll workers have had their training yet, that the poll workers during their training be told that. Rita can answer that question. She's next.
Most of the poll workers have already had their training, and it is just the training is a test. I agree with what everybody is saying. There are many people who are speaking many languages who come to vote. At every poll site, the ballot is prominently displayed on a post so that people can read the ballot before they get it. I suggest that when they put the ballot up, that there be a card above it that says, don't forget to turn the ballot, to flip the ballot, whatever you want. But there should be just not putting the ballots up without, saying there are two sides to this ballot in some form. Just a suggestion.
Well, I myself would sort of prefer, I don't know, that whoever is in charge at a poll site, either during training or as the poll workers pass out the ballot, that they just say, turn over the ballot. I don't know that people are going to read signs. They usually don't, but they would listen to an instruction, and it'd be really short and sweet.
Well, if you have both, if you have the language on the ballot itself, it's reinforced when the election worker is able to tell you to turn the ballot over.
Then may I suggest that it's not people who are giving the tests, but the person from the election board who is present, I don't know what they're called, at each of these who counts everyone's attendance, and that person is instructed to tell everybody as they check in, don't forget to tell everyone that there are two sides to the ballot. So we're asking the Board of Education to contact the people who talk to them all day long during an election.
Wait, I'm confused. Board of Education? You mean Board of Elections?
Elections.
Election. Okay. So, and who is
Peggy, you're muted. Rose, can you unmute Peggy?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there a manager, Rita, at each poll site? Okay, so the Board of Elections would tell managers to post a copy of the ballot, is that what we're saying, of the two-sided ballot, and to tell each poll worker to turn over the ballot, when they cast their vote?
Rose, please unmute Rita. And you can keep her unmuted.
Every poll has a coordinator, and every coordinator talks to the Board of Election, and that's how they get to be coordinators. They make more money for the day. They are in charge of everything. They are the ones that you're asking the Board of Elections to tell every coordinator to tell their poll workers to tell people that there are two sides to the ballot. Or that it will get done. The ballot is one ballot is always posted so that people can read the ballot before they get online or while they're online. The presidential election is different in as much as that how many people are online. You know, waiting an hour is not unheard of.
Okay, so they would, you would tell the poll workers to tell each of the voters to flip the ballot, but you'd also post both sides of this ballot. Okay, and the other question I have is, now we know this is a statewide initiative. Pardon my ignorance, but is there a state board of elections that we would send this to?
I only know I only know about the New York state of elections. That would have to be answered by one of our elected officials.
We can find that out.
Okay, so this would be sent to the state board of elections.
Right, the state, or maybe it's the city, or each city in the state. Somebody must know who they are because they get a ballot.
I assume it's a state, but we can definitely research that pretty quickly. Judy, do you have an answer to that?
Well, the city, I'd certainly write to the city board of elections. That's who we
Right.
get the ballots from.
Right.
Yeah, but
They're,
we can't.
they're the ones that have to instruct this manager to tell the people working there to turn over the ballot. That's
Yeah,
what said.
they would do that for the city, but this is a statewide initiative.
Okay,
And
but you must write to the city board of elections. If you write to the state, that's one thing. You can call Rebecca or Alex or Liz's office and find that out. But definitely the city board of elections. And then find out if there is a state board of elections, in which case you would add them to the list.
Right.
all right.
And yes, go ahead, Peggy.
So it's simply that the Board of Elections, state, city, would tell what we're going to call poll coordinators to tell their poll workers that voters, as they receive their ballot initiative, would be told to flip it and vote on both sides. And that the ballot would be posted on both sides.
That is done automatically. The ballot.
Okay. But it wouldn't hurt to,
on both sides,
reiterate.
And
Okay.
the other question is whether or not the ballots have been printed yet, and if not, if they can have the language to say, turn the ballot over on both sides. The front with the candidate you're voting for, and the back with the propositions. I think we should ask for that too.
Yeah, that turn the ballot should be on both sides of the ballot.
Right.
As you get it, it doesn't
Because
necessarily.
you don't know which side you're
looking.
getting, yeah.
Well, by the time that the full board meets in October to vote on a resolution, the ballots will not only be printed, but they will be, I think, sent out to veterans. They will have been at
What if we
least
do a
partially
letter
distributed.
instead of a resolution? Because the letter is something we can get out quickly.
Okay, if that's what the board prefers. But the alternative is just to leave out the print, turn over your ballot, leave the printout notice at the front of from our resolution and just tell them to tell poll workers. We could do it either way. We could do the letter, or we could do a resolution that simply asks poll workers to tell voters to flip their vote.
And board members in attendance, what are your thoughts? Letter versus resolution?
I think the ballots are probably printed.
I was just wondering. Yeah, okay.
I would send a letter and get it out as soon as possible. Talk to Valerie. And it would have your signatures and her signature, and send the letter out as soon as possible in case the ballots for New York City have not been printed.
I agree with Judy.
If they've been printed, then all we've done is waste time and sent a letter. ASAP.
The full board meeting is not until October 26th, which is really late. There'll be regular early voting by then. And so you've got to get people responsive as soon as possible. So I completely agree with Judy on this. Send out a letter and send it like immediately as soon as you can with Valerie's consent, because that's the only way to get some kind of action here. Also, I don't know if the city prints up city ballots and there are 5 city charter proposals on there that the mayor is really pushing for, what maybe the city already has a turnover or flip the ballot writing on the ballot in some way, because there's a strong mayoral incentive to get people to vote here.
Yeah, good point. Let's find out before we do anything. Maybe Alita's correct. Let's see what the ballot looks like now. Or do people disagree? I don't,
Just make a phone call to, I think Mr. Ryan was the head of the Board of Elections, and ask him if it's on the ballot now. That phone call could be made.
I'll call tomorrow.
And then if the ballot is done, don't put that part in to print it at the bottom. If the ballot hasn't been printed, then we include that. But we should find out immediately. That's an immediate question. He knows the answer.
And also we can use the word if possible, in the letter. That's the way to cover that. I think we should do whatever we can to push it forward. I would also suggest that maybe if you want to make a phone call, that you make a phone call to the Voting Reform Committee, because I think that they may have, well, actually, if it comes from the Voting Reform Committee, I think that it has maybe a little bit more urgency than coming from the Women and Families Committee, or a little more a nonpartisan, ship if it comes from the voting reform people. So if they want to do the letter together with us, I think that would be better. Well,
if I might, I hate to disagree, but it seems like time's of the essence. Voting reform is not meeting this week, or I don't think they're meeting next week either. So why don't we just find out what's on the ballot? And I don't see any problem of a letter coming from Valerie.
Right.
To the, I actually think it should also go to the state Board of Elections. We want the success or failure of the ERA initiative. It will depend on voters statewide. So that's why I've been pushing this state Board of Elections issue so much. But anyway, I think
we have answers we have to get. We have to find out the role of
Yeah.
the New York State Board of Elections. We have to find out if the ballots are printed or not. We'll get that information, and then that will help us. Robin has something to say. Can you unmute Robin, please, Rose?
Gail, thank you. The ballots, in fact, are printed and they're posted on the New York City Board of Elections site right now.
Oh.
Okay, so we can't then, I assume, get them to include a notice at the bottom. It's too late to say flip your ballot.
So Peggy, it may be on there.
Oh,
let's look at it.
Not to
Okay.
interrupt you. I'm sorry
Yeah,
for
no,
interrupting.
go ahead.
But what I saw is the 5 or 6 props, including the one that we've been discussing this evening, and then a list of all the offices that are up for election. And early voting starts in what, 2 weeks here in Manhattan? Is that right?
Yeah.
So
so.
whatever is done must be done with some degree of alacrity, or
Yeah.
it's not, or it'll just be hollow and make us feel good. But
Well, I think it sounds like the ballots must have been printed by now, but Gail was kind enough to say that she'd check tomorrow. So we'll just, if there's any leeway to do something, we'll do something, starting with a letter. But the only thing I'm wondering, they could certainly tell the poll workers to tell their voters to flip the ballot. This they could do, but whether or not we can get them to add a line to a printed ballot,
I doubt it.
it's unlikely. But we can definitely, as I said, we can definitely ask the state and city elected officials to tell poll workers to tell their voters to flip the ballot.
All right, so what we will do, if everybody concurs, is we know based on what Robin has seen that the ballots are printed. So the key is to ensure as best as possible that voters are told to look at both sides of the ballot and vote on them. And so it's a simple letter, but I think it's one that Peggy and I try to get out very quickly.
Yeah, and I think to Laura's point, it would be signed by Valerie. So
Well, we'll call Valerie tomorrow.
Yeah.
She was on for a while, but then she had to go back to work.
Okay.
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 Robin, did you have one more question or something? Rose, would you?
I have one more comment.
Okay.
I don't know that the ballots are printed, but the format itself is posted on the Board of Elections. Okay, which is different than saying it's already printed.
Yeah.
I'll call tomorrow and see if I can get that answer quickly.
That's true, but they send the ballots out to veterans abroad, and I wouldn't be surprised if they've already started printing them. But thank you, Gail. You've kind enough to offer to check it out.
Well, just so that we verified and we know exactly what the status is.
Okay.
Any other comments, ideas, thoughts?
Thank you all.
If not, thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate all your input. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. Everybody be well.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.